You're listening to Stand Tall and Own It, the podcast for high-performing female leaders who are ready to make an impact by discovering the safety that comes from understanding their own value and exercising their own authority. I'm your host, Andrea Johnson, and I'm here to tell you it is time to just truly be you, my strong friend. It's time to stand tall and own it. Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Stand Tall and Own It. I'm your host, Andrea Johnson, the Intentional Optimist. And as I shared last week, this episode that I'm sharing with you today was supposedly recorded and then it disappeared. So I'm re-recording, but I think it's going to be even better. You know, sometimes you do something that you think, oh, I really could have done that better, or I explained it in a certain way. And I'm like, why did I do that? Well, you're going to benefit from that. So today we're going to walk through just an overview of intentional optimism. I'm just going to tell you that right out the gate. This is a follow-up to the episode that I did about 3 or 4 ago, maybe 3 episodes ago, called Core Values versus Priorities, or Life Principles. What's the difference? And I want to make sure that for anybody, especially who's new here, or you've started listening to this once it changed over to Stand Tall and Own It, as opposed to what it used to be, which was Intentional Optimists, Unconventional Leaders. When it was that named podcast, and I was talking about it all the time, intentional optimism came up a lot. We talked about the 6 tenets all the time. But when I switched over last September 2023, I talk about it a little bit less because I'm focusing more on core values. But here's the thing. They're all kind of intertwined. We're going to share some graphics this week that show how the 3 big principles of what I call magnetic leadership, or the 3 big pieces of that, work together. And those are understanding your core values, understanding who you are, then understanding how you communicate, which is your DISC wiring. And I know you've heard me talk about DISC on here quite often. You can just scroll back and look for some episodes on DISC. And then understanding how you live out your core values and your communication in a way that is with grace and ease. And I say this is how we do what we do. We live, these are the attitudes and mindsets that we live out our core values, our dreams, and our goals with excellence. So if you want to go back a couple episodes to review, I invite you to do that. But just as a really quick review, core values are the principles and priorities that guide an individual's actions, and they represent the foundational convictions that allow a person to navigate complex situations, all the twists and turns, all the harrowing winds and rain that come, while still keeping your identity and authority at the forefront. Your life principles are, principles, according to Wikipedia, is a fundamental truth, right? So these are propositions that serve as foundations for systems of belief or behavior or a chain of reasoning. It's a guide for behavior and evaluation. Now, I talked about how like all core values are principles, but not all principles are core values. And I shared with you at the time that the way I live out my life principles, those are the 6 tenets of intentional optimism. And I started out, when I started my business journey, I wanted to figure out how to live the way I wanted to live. Because it doesn't take very much. You can walk through a bookstore, you can Google, you can go online, find any number of, these are the principles and the values that you need to have in your business. These are the things that make you the characteristics of a good leader. Those are all really good things. And I actually have some books that I teach from that share really good principles for how you do leadership, or how you do parenting, how you do business, all of those things. But for me, I needed a specific one that was mine. So what I'm going to share with you today is a brief understanding of where it came from for me, how it all started, and what it looks like. And to be clear, core values are inside you and life principles are outside you. That's just a very basic distinction that I make. It tends to kind of make things a little more clear for most people that are listening to me. But my goal in transformational leadership and transformational coaching is to move you from imitating other people's principles and priorities to defining your own for sustainable, impactful leadership. And that's where those 3 pieces come in of magnetic leadership: the who you are, how you communicate, and how you live. Now, when things play out for us, many times we start with something outside and work in. It's the easiest way. Like when I start with clients, a lot of times I'll start with a DISC report because it's very easy to understand. It's right there in black and white. It's some very clear principles and it's assessment they take, whereas core values are something that you have to dig deep on your own and find them. They're a little more nebulous. But when things play out, that I use my core values as my compass, and then I use my life principles as my mode of transportation. That's what I shared a couple of episodes ago. So what I want to do is share with you the realistic roadmap of intentional optimism today and show you how using my compass, or how having intentional optimism gives me the ability to use my compass. So living by somebody else's rules, not great. It can be a great place to start. There are some really good, like I said, other, modes of transportation, if you will. There are some really good principles out there to live by, fabulous books that you can read, and you'll find some really good ones. But for me, this is what I have. So let me tell you where it came from. My goal is to be on 200 podcasts this year, to be interviewed on 200 different podcasts, or at least podcast episodes, because I have already got a couple of double bookings where people are like, can you come back? Which is really, really, really good. So if you have a favorite podcast that you enjoy and you think that what I have to share might be a good place to share it, please either let them know or let me know, because I would love to share this information with more and more people. But one of the things I do is I start with my story. And you can go all the way back to some of my blog posts to July 2019 and see where some of this started. It'll give you some, I don't know, I guess I'm going to call it my initial before, basic before evolution kind of, this is what intentional optimism looks like. It also is a little naive, right? Before I've kind of grown through some things. But the basic story of where it came from is when I turned 50, it was a little bit of a seminal year for me, which it has been for many women or men. And for me, I found myself 50 years old, with a job that I did not care for, knowing that that's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, knowing that I had so much more to offer. I lost my mother. Let's see, I turned 50, August, September, October, November, December, 6 months. 6 months in, I lost my mother to breast cancer. I had an 8-year-old adopted son, and I knew that this is just not where I wanted to be. And there are things I loved about my mother and the way she showed up for people and the way she lived her life. And I decided I needed to figure out how I wanted to show up, because what if I have another 50 years? I want to make them different. I want to make them better. I want to make them so that if for some reason I don't have a long period of time to say goodbye, I don't have to worry about it. I want to make sure that how I live each day, I could say goodbye tomorrow or tonight, and it's enough, right? And that's a little sobering, but when a parent dies, it kind of makes you think. All right, so when my mother died, I started looking inside to say, what are the things that she displayed and what are the things that I have, and how can I step into some of the things I love about her, and how can I step up and better amplify some things that I love about me. So what I did was I sat down and I brainstormed. If you've ever heard the way I described walking through and understanding your core values, it's a very similar process. So I brain dumped everything, and I have pages and pages of words that I said I wanted to live by or things that I wanted to do. And I still have the pages. They're in my pantry, or they're in my cabinet over here. And I started narrowing them down, and I came up with 6 main, after 10, it sounds very familiar. Actually, it was probably about 8, but I realized there were categories, but I realized that there were truly 6. And when I decided, what am I going to call them? I thought it'd be principles and pillars. I looked at all these things, but I decided they would be tenets, because tenets are things that we highly regard, and we want to make sure that we live them out well. And they're things that we are it's more than a principle. It's more than a pillar. It's something that we truly work out. So I will share every week in the show notes, there is a link to a What is Intentional Optimism download. So it's the 6 tenets right there. And so here, I'm going to walk through them for you and share what they are. I shared a little bit last week and if you go to my older podcasts, you'll hear how I do this. How does intentional optimism, or what tenets of intentional optimism show up in that action or that environment or that scenario? And so I did that last week, and I shared a few of them. I shared 3 of them, that how they showed up and helped me work through some trauma responses. But here they are, all 6 of them. And again, you can get this download to see what they are, because it's a lot of information. But the basic tenets are optimistic, present, energetic, courageous, wise, and intentional. So we say they bookend optimistic.
Could you try again?
So they bookend. We say they optimistic and intentional are at the ends, and everything else is in the middle. And if you don't have those 2 on the ends, you don't have the whole thing. It holds it together. So what does it mean to be optimistic? I get this question all the time. People want to know the difference between like sunny optimism and what I do. I see optimistic as hopeful. At its core, being optimistic is being hopeful. It's seeing the future, knowing that something good can come, knowing that good things are possible, knowing that that we can make a difference with the things that we do. It's being confident, understanding that if the glass is only halfway, if milk is only halfway up in the glass, that glass is half full. It is not half empty. Being willing to say, I have a glass half full of blessing rather than a glass that is half empty. And being proactive as well, being proactive about the journey, making the journey easy, promoting unity of vision, all of these things, being hopeful, confident, proactive is what I mean by optimistic. This is not a sunny optimism. It is a very realistic optimism. It is a deliberate attempt to move forward in a positive way. The second tenet is being present. And this is not just being present in the moment. It encompasses so much more. I call the first piece of it is I say we have grown-up wonder. It is not the kind of wonder that children have where they don't understand why the lights twinkle in Christmas or they don't understand why the flower is there. It's understanding why the flower comes up every spring and feeling more wonder because of that, because I know that it had to lay dormant in the soil for a certain amount of time before the temperature got exactly right. Or I know that looking into the sky and seeing a star, it's traveled, I don't know, billions of years, that light to get to my eye, to be able to see it. And that is what I call grown-up wonder. The more we know, the more wonder we should have. And that helps us be very present. Being present also means being generous, answering yes, sharing my time, sharing my money, embracing and nurturing relationships. It's not always easy, but always being open to new connections. When people, I get burned on this a lot of times when people want to connect with me on social media like LinkedIn or something, and then immediately they go into like spam me with like, I can make your business do this, that, or the other, and your YouTube channel or whatever. If you're listening to me and that's you, please don't do that to me. Because immediately I'm going to be like, yeah, no, because I want to make connections, but I'm not interested in them all being transactional. I want to have meaningful connections. And I usually say yes because I want to promote the idea that I have enough and I can be present. The third tenet is energetic. And this is, it's more than just having energy. I think that's just a very surface way of looking at it. When I first put the tenets together, I shared them with a friend, and the first piece of energetic is called having an attitude of industry, thinking outside the box, allowing creativity to guide me, looking at how I do my work differently, maybe even my finances, developing my skills, always looking for the next thing. But this word of industry really, she was like, what? Industry, that sounds terrible. I want individual creativity. I'm like, read it better. read it from a different angle, because it's all about having that attitude of knowing that I can make a difference. And then also being energetic is being able to tap into excitement. This is one of the areas that my mom was so good at. She could just scrunch up her nose and her eyes would sparkle and she would get so excited. And every time we would walk in the door, every time she saw my son, this was the look that she got on her face. And when she did that, it was contagious. When we have joy and we allow that joy to bubble up, it becomes a contagious thing that other people can participate in. So it fuels the ability to be more productive, being willing to tap into excitement. When you share it, it circles back and fuels your ability to do so even more. It's a self-perpetuating thing. But the other piece of being energetic, when we think of energy, it's life, right? It's life focused. and this is a conversation that, I had to have recently, and I shared on my last episode that I had a traumatic response to some things, and I kind of broke bad on my son. And I looked at my husband this morning and I said, yeah, why is a washcloth more important than my kid? People are always more important than ideas or things. So I don't always execute intentional optimism tenets perfectly, but these are what I aspire to. These are the things that I want to do. These are the ways that I've chosen to live, the attitudes and mindsets I've chosen to have. And so if you listened to me last week, I shared, I actually walked through with him, please be patient with me. We're getting there. Let's do this thing and let's work through it because he's more important. And I even said that to him. I said, you're more important to me and we're going to work this out. But this gives me the ability to encourage others and to be reminded that people are always more important than places, things, ideas, principles, anything. People are just more important because I am life focused, because that's where energy is life, right? So that's where it comes from. The fourth tenet is courageous. I shared a little bit about this last week as well. But this is where leadership comes in. This is charismatic care for others. When you do that and you care about other people and you're willing to be a servant leader, it pulls them in. When we lead through service, it really gives people the understanding that they matter and they want to follow. So this is where courageous is the tenet where leadership actually comes in. Another piece of courage is adventure, being willing to see some of the challenges that I go through or the challenges that are presented to us in life as an adventure. For a long time, I was in a coaching community, and for nearly a year, I called myself like it was like, I'm Andrea Johnson, and this is what I call myself. And I called myself a challenge acceptor. And when I first put that up there, people were like, this is so cool. And I'm like, no, it's not. Because it means that I've told myself that I want to accept and take challenges and to challenge the status quo, to challenge the way I think about something, to challenge my ability to do something better. It's just being ready to make the journey fun and to even gamify it sometimes. And the last piece of courageous is actually a result of the other pieces and falling down and getting back up. It's having resilience. It's being willing to have some solid character. I talked earlier about a lot of life principle kind of systems out there are all about having character, and it's being willing to have the kind of character that means I'm going to do what I'm going to say, or I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. I consistently do the smaller hard things, and I keep my eye focused on the prize so that it gets the results that I want. So that's the fourth tenet, which is courageous. The fifth tenet is wise. This is one that I think was probably, and I usually share it this way, it's the hardest one for me to fully embrace in myself, because none of us want to be arrogant, I don't think. And for sure, I don't think of myself necessarily as a wise person. I think of myself as having knowledge and skill and understanding how to apply that knowledge. But that's really the definition of wisdom. And people have been coming to me for years. They would come and sit in my office because it was a safe place. Well, that's part of wisdom, right? Being a safe place for others is not just being present. It's also about being wise. So when I talk about wisdom, I mean understanding, seeing what's below the surface, being willing to look at what's there, to listen well, to seek others' perspectives, knowing that wisdom comes from both inside and outside of me, not just one place, both places. I have a hard time trusting the wisdom that comes from inside. I don't know about you. If we're arrogant, we have a hard time trusting the wisdom that comes from outside. But another part of being wise, and I shared this a little bit last week, is the words that we speak. They matter. And when I find myself becoming very negative, I realize I have to stop talking. I have to limit the amount of negativity I put out there because it affects everyone. It affects me. It affects all the people around me. I want my words to be gracious and inclusive and worth listening to, because it's real. The energy, like all these tenets kind of tie together. The energy that we put out there with our words is very real. I want my words to be both weighty and uplifting, right? I want them to have solidity to them, and I want them to matter, and I want the things that I say to matter, but I also want you to leave feeling uplifted. Even talking about a tough subject, I want you to feel uplifted. And the third piece of being wise is respect. And this really showed up in last night in my conversation with my son. I wanted to make sure that he understood, I respect you And I need you to respect me in the moment and to respect the fact that I'm working through something. Therefore, I model respect so that other people understand that this is the way we do respect around here. We don't just respect with our words. We respect with our actions. And so all of that is encompassed in being wise. It's not just about being able to say some really quippy, wise things. Every once in a while, I got something that comes out my mouth that's super duper wise, and I'm always surprised when that happens. But mostly I think wisdom is just showing up for other people. And the final piece, which kind of pulls it all together, is being intentional. It's understanding I have a purpose. I know why I do what I do. Being others focused is important for me, and I move with confidence toward both that point on the horizon and whatever goal I've set. It also means I have a plan. You know, the old adage, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That's real. For some people, and there's ways in which I have learned how to make plans for myself, knowing what kind of person I am and how I function and how I need energy to flow in and out of my life. I want to be as prepared as possible, and yet I want to be able to let things happen. So I consider my options, but I want to be facing forward and not backward. So part of intentional optimism is truly facing forward and moving forward. And then also being intentional about growth. I want to make sure that I'm always learning, embracing new life situations. Sometimes that means really reading and really listening to podcasts. Other times it means putting all that stuff down and really implementing the things that I've learned. So I want to promote growth in others, organizations, and institutions. This is why I do, literally, why I do what I do. It is why I'm a transformational leadership coach. And I know that was a lot, and it was a little bit of a fire hose and a little bit of an information dump for you, but I invite you to take a look at intentional optimism. Take a look at the 6 tenets. Download that document and see how it resonates with you. Go back and listen to some of my really old podcast episodes and see how I thought about it at the beginning and how I think about it now. Because if you need to borrow a set of life principles, you can start with intentional optimism. You can start with what it means to be optimistic, present, energetic, courageous, wise, and intentional. Those are some really good tenets. They will build character in you, and they will help you implement the things that you've already decided are important to you. They will help you implement your core values. They will help you communicate and live out, not just through words, the things that you're passionate about. So I invite you today, if you're at a place where you need them, this is where you can start. You can start with a plan, start with that free download. You could start with both the core values download and the intentional optimism piece. They're both free exercises. If this resonated with you, I would, more than anything, what I want and the results I want to come out of this podcast and my work is that I would create a lot in you and in all my listeners, this ability to be a magnetic leader, to understand who you are, to understand how you communicate, and to know how to live it out. And that's what this is all about. So if you're watching on YouTube, please respond in the comments. I'm getting some great comments on YouTube. And if you are following me on LinkedIn or we're connected on Instagram, DM me and let me know what resonated for you, because I would love to be able to go deeper in certain areas if you need it. And I want to know what works. This is something that we all need. And to understand the difference between what our core values are and our life principles are is also very helpful, because it helps us know what we're aspiring to. It helps us understand both the solidity and the rootedness of who we are as an individual, and yet how we can live that out in different ways. I cannot wait to hear from you. Please be in touch with me and let me know what resonated. And until next time, I invite you all to stand tall and own it.